in part 2 of farts, where I promised you I would tell you all about what your farts are telling you, because I got a great question that came in, and I think in answering that I'll help you all out with deciphering your farts. I've always been a gassy person. I'm constantly holding in my gas and I often have cramps because of it. And when I finally can let it out, it smells terrible. I'm starting to think this isn't normal. Is it? Okay, alright, okay. Let's get into it. What are your farts telling you? Is it normal? Like I said in the previous video, everyone farts about 10 to 20 times a day. Some of them have a little bit of a stank to them because there is sulfur up in there. But, you know, if you're farting all the time and it's causing you discomfort and pain, and they're quite stinky, it could mean quite a lot of things. And it all comes down to digestion. So I'm just going to take you through the various different things that might be going wrong with your digestion that is contributing to excessive gas. And the first one is you might have a carbohydrate intolerance. Now, this is a really interesting thing that happens when we eat too much of one food all the time and we exhaust the enzymes needed to digest those foods. In a lot of cultures, carbohydrates, refined carbohydrates, are a food that we eat all the time since we're little. And so we will often deplete the enzymes needed to break those carbohydrates down properly. And so we're not really digesting them properly. I told you what happens to undigested food in the system. The bacteria feed off of it and they create gas. So you might have a carbohydrate intolerance. You might be low in amylase or one of the other enzymes that breaks carbs down. Or you might actually have a gluten sensitivity. Again, a lot of people have a sensitivity to gluten and gliadin. They're large protein molecules and often are hard to digest. Then there is, of course, celiac disease, which would often be accompanied by a lot of cramping, diarrhea, and vitamin deficiencies. If you think you have celiac disease, please go get tested. And of course, then you'd have to avoid strictly anything that has gluten in it. And number 2 would be an intolerance to dairy, which is very similar to the carbohydrate intolerance, where you are just lacking the enzyme necessary to break down the sugars that are in milk. Now, the sugars that are in milk are called lactose. We need an enzyme called lactase to break down that sugar. If we are missing that, or it's exhausted because we've been having too much dairy our entire lives, again, undigested sugars in your system, bacteria feed off of it, too much gas. So if you suspect you might be lactose intolerant, you can take an enzyme that has lactase in it, or you could try giving up dairy or cutting it back a lot and see how that helps you. Also, a lot of people just have a hard time digesting dairy for a whole other reason. There's casein in it, it's a large protein molecule, and it's a highly allergenic food. So a lot of people aren't digesting dairy properly anyway, and so it could be that. In that case, an enzyme won't help you. I would just suggest to cut back or cut it out and see if you get less gas. So the third reason that you might be having excessive yucky farts is because you might be eating too much meat, or maybe meat just doesn't agree with you. Now, meat is really hard to digest. So a lot of us have compromised digestion already. You don't have good stomach acid, your pancreas isn't working as effectively at, releasing the enzymes that you need to digest meat. So a lot of people do have problems digesting meat properly. So it goes through the system very slowly. It kind of hangs around. There's a lot of undigested particles and proteins going through your system that bacteria can feed on and putrefy and whatnot. So that might be one of your issues. If that is an issue and you think you're eating maybe too much meat, again, cut back or cut it out for a while, see what happens. Take a food journal just to mark your progress so you know if it's actually that or maybe it's something else. Now, one of the most common reasons that people have excessive gas and they fart just way too much is because of bad food combining. Now, this is a little bit tricky because there's a whole thing to get into about what foods combine well with other foods, and I'm not going to get into it right now because it is a little bit complicated, and a lot of people can't really effectively incorporate proper food combining into their lives on a daily basis. If you have a severe problem and you want to try food combining, I highly recommend it. It's very, very good. But for the average person, I like to just point out 1 or 2 things about food combining, and that is fruit digests a lot quicker than other foods. So it's best to try to have fruit alone and away from other foods. And then you have like proteins and starchy carbs, which digest at totally different rates. They need different enzymes to do the digesting. And so when you combine those 2 things in, say, like a hamburger or spaghetti and meatballs, that compromises digestion, and then you get gas for the reasons I mentioned above. So if you're really concerned about it, try to eat fruits alone, and also try not to have starchy carbs with your animal proteins. The fifth reason that you might be having too much gas, stinky farts, is because you might be constipated. Now, if you're constipated, you know. Now, if you're constipated, all of that is sort of roughage and undigested food or indigestible material is sitting around in your colon, and bacteria will continue to feed off of it, and it will continue to create gas, and often that can be more odorous because of the type of food that it is and the type of bacteria that's digesting it in your colon. So try and get things moving. That's a whole other conversation, but constipation can be a reason for smelly and excessive gas. So the sixth reason that you might be having too much gas, or what your body might be trying to tell you with all of that gas, is that you have a yeast overgrowth. So there's a yeast that we have naturally in our systems called Candida. It needs to be there. It can be beneficial, but if too much of it occurs because it's feeding on too many of these undigested sugars, then we have an imbalance in our gut bacteria. It's dysbiosis, candidiasis. You might have heard it being called a lot of different things. But basically, if you have too much yeast, it kind of turns into, it changes its structure from smaller yeast organisms to a larger unfriendly fungus that can, this is a whole other condition, but your body might be telling you that you have too much Candida in the system, too much yeast. It's feeding on the undigested sugars. You will know that, like, as soon as you eat a pizza crust or beer or cookies and candies, that you instantly get gas. That could be yeast overgrowth. And then the seventh reason is you might have an infection in your gut lining. So you might have parasite or fungus, bacteria, anything like that sort of lodged in your gut lining, which would be feeding off your food and creating a lot of gas. If you suspect you might have an infection, obviously you need to go to the doctor and get that sorted out. There's lots of different things that you can do naturally to try and get rid of infections. But that could be one of the reasons. So there you have it. Those are 7 things that your body might be trying to tell you with your excessive farting. If you're wondering which it could be for you, what I would tell you to do right now is start a food journal. Just map out the next 7 days on a little chart. Write down everything you eat when you eat it, and then about 20 minutes after to a half an hour after, write down how you feel and if you have any symptoms. And then when you review that a week after, it might help point to, it's like a little mystery. It might help you do some Sherlock Holmesing on your own diet and try and get to the bottom of why you may be farting too much. Yeah, so I hope this helped. I know that it's something that a lot of people don't like to talk about, but it's really important to know what your body's telling you. And if your digestion is off, if you like this video, please give it a like, share it with your friends who you think might be a little bit too gassy. I actually do have a 3rd part to this farting bonanza, and it's going to talk about all the things that you can do to stop farting so much. If farting is a problem for you, excessive gas is a problem for you and your loved ones, I've got a list of things that you could be doing and eating to make your life a little bit better. And that's going to be in next week's Q&A, so keep your eye out for that. In the meantime, I wish you healthy bellies and happy lives.